All right, we have a quorum.
How about that?
Pretty good.
Jarvis is here too.
Yeah, I got him. I think he sent me an email.
I didn't hear about this either.
I haven't heard from him. Saw him at TMA, but we never got a chance to talk. So I don't know if he's coming or not. He's not going to be here. I think Manifold sent me something.
Beer's not coming. Manifold, I don't think's coming. I haven't heard from Bradley.
I hadn't heard from Bradley, but I don't think he's
I
coming.
don't know where Jarvis is.
He's here.
Yeah.
Okay, so just this one?
Where'd he go? He was just here. Yeah. For right now.
Jeff.
Okay. Over Oklahoma?
Hey, what kind of noise does this make when you hammer it? Is it like rap?
Whose bag is it?
I have no idea, but that's where you're supposed to sit. So.
I think you're supposed to use the other end. Other end. What?
I don't know.
Maybe you shouldn't touch it. Maybe you should call the police and make sure it's.
There you go.
Hey, I don't know how to use these things. Okay, put that up. All right, we'll go ahead and call to order. Wow. Whoa. Look at 89.52. We're doing well. I thought we were going to turn that towards Dudley, actually. Where is Dudley? So. No. Oh.
It's a smooth meeting. What's going on?
We'll hurry. All right. So, call to order. Sorry that we're late. Everybody looks like they have their post-perennial look anyway. First up on the agenda is to review the mission and vision statements for GETAC. They are on the agenda. I haven't read them the last few meetings, so I'll read them this time. Vision, a unified, comprehensive, and effective EMS trauma system for a healthy, safe Texas. Our mission is to promote, develop, and maintain a comprehensive EMS trauma system that will meet the needs of all patients and that will raise the standards for community health care by implementing innovative techniques and systems for the delivery of emergency care for the entire population. So just remember that that is why we are here. I will be jumping all over the agenda today like I always do, quite frankly. We were not able, I shouldn't say we're not able, I was not successful in posting a number of the items to the web. Therefore, I don't think we should, we can discuss them, but we probably will not approve them because I don't feel like everyone has had an adequate chance to look at them. We also had some couple of last-minute people that can't make it that had agenda items, so that's changed it. And that's all okay because our agenda is so long anyway. The agenda is long on purpose in order to try to make sure we can talk about anything we might need to talk about because of the rules, Open Meetings Act rules. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying this is the best way I know of that we can discuss items without violating the rules. So I saw Dr. Peirce come in, and I know he's a busy guy, so if he doesn't mind, I'll actually jump right down to him if you would like to present your item, sir. Are you ready, or would you like to wait? No, I'm ready. Okay. So it's, I don't know if people are looking at paper or guidebook. You can look at either one to see the agenda for this meeting. The GETAC committees and council are now on guidebook. I think an email went out about how to use that. I don't know if everybody got it. If you didn't get it, I can actually forward it to me if you want to send me an email. But Dr. Peirce, if you would discuss something to us and explain it to us, because I think it's the first time we've heard the issue. And it's entitled Medicare and Medicaid, American College of Cardiology, National Cardiac Data Registries, otherwise as referred to, and you'll hear a lot of people call this ACC-NCDR, coding of PCI in the cath-PCI registry after cardiac arrest and the potential effects on patient outcomes. That is a very long title, and I think, come up with it. Yeah, I know, but it has to explain what we're going to talk about. So I will defer to Dr. Peirce to please explain it, and then I think we're going to have a significant discussion about this issue.
Okay, so thank you. So there were a couple of pre-reads which went out, which are rather lengthy. So I'm going to obviously not go through them in detail, but I'll hit the high points. Thank you. So the point is that there is some research that's been done looking at patients who've been resuscitated from cardiac arrest in the pre-hospital environment and taken to hospitals. And there's some really good articles that were referenced, and I brought the most recent one with me, looking at the survival potential of such patients. And if you think about it, these patients can be broken down into a couple of groups. One is those that were initially found to be in VF, and those that were initially found to be in another rhythm, those that arrived to the hospital with some level of neurologic function, those that arrived to the hospital with no evidence of neurologic function, those that arrived to the hospital in shock states, those that arrived to the hospital in hemodynamically stable states, so on and so forth. And so with some of these folks, and very importantly, some of these folks arrive and their post-resuscitation ECG clearly shows they're having an acute ST segment elevation of myocardial infarction, and other patients don't. And so it seems intuitive that the patient who arrives at the hospital who has some neurologic function, is not in a shock state, has an EKG showing a STEMI, was initially found in a shockable rhythm, that's probably a relatively high-yield patient to go to the cath lab. Conversely, if you find a patient who's in a shock state, was in a non-VF, non-shockable rhythm initially, does not have an acute STEMI on their ECG, and perhaps is at an extreme of age, that may be considered to be a very high-risk patient for, if you take them to the cath lab, whether or not you're going to get a good outcome. And so somewhere between those extremes, there needs to be some guidance as to who we think should go and who we think maybe shouldn't go. It's an extremely difficult decision, and perhaps there's even some moral and ethical implications for the decision makers as to which patients should go. So if you look to the science, what it shows is that, and there's three good articles that show that patients who are resuscitated, whether they be in a shockable rhythm initially or not, that of those patients, if they are taken to the cath lab, a very large, in fact, the majority of those patients, even those not found in a shockable rhythm initially and don't have STEMI on their ECG, still have correctable lesions at cath lab. And in fact, there's studies out showing now that if those patients, and the most recent one, which is published in Resuscitation, shows that if those patients who were found in cardiac arrest and were not shown to be having a STEMI post-arrest, if they're taken to the cath lab and many of them are found to have a correctable lesion, whether they get it corrected or not, there's an increased survival rate, functional survival rate, amongst those patients if they go to the cath lab. I may have misstated. The ones who get, it isn't really clear in here, but those who go to the cath lab, that is an independent predictor of a good neurologic outcome. You're wrinkling your forehead, and I know why. Wow. But the bottom line was they didn't get to,
Selection.
I overstated it a little bit, but they didn't get to that level of detail. But what they said was if they go to the cath lab, so they're resuscitated from cardiac arrest, they're not shown to be having a STEMI post-arrest. If they go to the cath lab, where many of them are found to have correctable lesions, but just going to the cath lab was an independent predictor of a good neurologic outcome. Yet, and American Heart Association put out one of our other pre-reads, a position statement, commenting on the fact that reimbursement for going to the cath lab has been tied to the efficacy of the operator or the center that is taking these patients. And so if your mortality and morbidity numbers are not favorable, or the less favorable they become, your reimbursement is tied to that. So now we've got a problem, getting back to what I started with. If you got the patient who was resuscitated from a shockable rhythm, they've got a clear STEMI, and they got some neurologic function, and they're not in shock, those patients are probably going to go to the cath lab. But it's somewhere between there and the other end, the physicians are left with a decision as to whether or not to take these patients to the cath lab, and there's the financial confounder now as to if my numbers look bad or if my center's numbers start looking bad by taking higher risk patients, then our reimbursement will drop. And that is certainly an unintended consequence of what was probably a very well-intended desire to get folks to become very proficient at cardiac catheterization and therefore maintain their numbers. But in this subset of patients, those who have been resuscitated from cardiac arrest, it is clearly, and we now have evidence, is suggesting that as having a very negative outcome, or at least potentially having a negative outcome. I will tell you that in my community, as I've talked with folks, my paramedics will anecdotally tell you that Certain hospitals they go to, they're very aggressive. They take pretty much everybody to the cath lab. Other hospitals they go to, they really consternate over whether or not this patient should go to the cath lab. And some of my paramedics would even suggest that there are some individuals who seem to try to find a reason not to go. And that's a pretty awful thing for me to have to say. And I know I'm being videotaped here, so don't challenge me to give you a specific example, and that's why I don't mention any specific sites, but I'm getting this from my paramedics. So I think that this conundrum is having a real effect. And so one of my reasons for being here is twofold. One is to just bring awareness to this problem so that everybody can go back to their community and start looking and saying, if you think it's occurring in your community, and getting to those folks and having conversations with them. I don't know that you're going to be able to do anything necessarily about it, but find out what's going on in your community. And number two is potentially, and I don't know what role GETAC could play in this, but it seems to me that this is a body where our voice, when it goes to the GETAC, should be heard. And so perhaps there's an audience. I mean, the Heart Association has come out in this position statement, which is pretty loud. I mean, if nothing else, we can echo this. Now, who our audience specifically would be, it needs to be the payers. It needs to be the people who decide how much you're going to get paid for, and marrying this to the mortality rates, which is not an audience we usually deal with. But that's who's driving this conundrum. And I just think that we ought to at least chime in on it, if nothing else.
Do you know, is the cardiac committee looking at this? Are they considering a position statement? What else is going on in addition to what we're doing?
Well, so this committee, the EMS committee following this, and the cardiac committee following that today are all going to be discussing this.
Okay.
So this is the first time. Your committee has the first opportunity to take any comment or action.
Dr. Ellerby's
Congratulations.
So, yeah, let's open it up to questions and discussion, because this is there's a lot of legs on this, because it's tied to transparency and reporting, and we were just talking at lunch about hospitalcompare.gov and all those kind of things. And they're as starting to get out in the press. You don't always want to compare facilities because you're not doing like comparisons, and we're all smart people and we know how to make things look better or worse. One of the ways to make your mortality rate look better is not to take sick people.
Well, that's that comment about the pre-diabetes. We were talking about that earlier. If you want to lower your...
Is that on? Can you all hear him? Okay.
Too much.
Let's see an on switch.
Eat it. Yeah, talk right
So
into it.
if you want to decrease your mortality, you put a bunch of not sick people in there. So I think what you end up seeing, the incentive anyway, I don't want to say that this is happening, certainly not in my community, maybe yours, but not mine, is that the cardiologists are incentivized to take only those people to the cath lab that run marathons. And now they're going to have a great outcome. They may not need it. So there's a perverse incentive not to take the sickest patients. And we're starting to hypothetically see that with patients who are having STEMIs, crystal clear, no cardiac arrest involved, then go into cardiac arrest. And now there's a reason to say, well, we want to exclude them because they're cardiac arrest. So I think the way to do it is similar to the way Mission Lifeline does their door to balloon. You carve out statistical exceptions. So you can say, tie reimbursement to mortality all you want, but let's exclude from that calculation patients in cardiac arrest. So the cardiologists then essentially get a freebie for assuming the increased risk of trying to provide a benefit to those sickest of patients.
You could also, I agree with you completely, but you could also say that if you take that patient to the lab, it still counts towards an intervention. Because remember,
In terms of numbers?
In terms of numbers, so you still get an intervention. It's just the morbidity and mortality associated with this particularly high-risk group of patients won't count towards your morbidity and mortality numbers. So you don't lose whatever incentive they may have had to take with the cath lab. It still counts. It just, if it turns out badly, it doesn't count against you.
And especially, apparently, what you were saying, just there's something magic about the air in the cath lab. So if they just walk through there, that improves mortality. They don't actually have to do anything.
Well, the cynic in me says that sometimes a patient like that just winds up getting closer attention. So the other little things that may have been missed had they not gotten that special extra added level of attention, whether it be their glucose control or their temperature control or whatever, that may be contributing to it as well.
Yeah, I can see this eventually coming to geriatric trauma. if you just exclude all geriatric trauma, your stats have got to be better. So why is, is this where we're going?
Problem's complicated. I was this last week way up north in Alaska, and speaking at a conference with Carl Kern, which is one of the leaders in this out of University of Tucson, and he gave an example of a hospital in the Northeast that started taking all of these folks to the cath lab, and they went from number 1 in the city to number 5 in the city, and their administration decided to no longer be a cardiac center, so they stopped intervention simply because their numbers dropped because they were doing this.
Plus, it goes to the local newspaper.
Yeah, it's all over the newspapers, of course. So the difficulty is to exclude these folks, although there are talks. I mean, that's truly, as far as tying to reimbursement, that's an act of Congress, because that's just the way the rules are written. And the problem is not us as EMS physicians and those practicing this. We know the right thing. The problem is the cardiologists who have to do this. Because some of them are about the numbers, but some of them truly don't want to get up that much. And these are sick people. Even if they have a sentinel lesion, you open them up, they are complicated cases. They're going to need VADs and Pellas. They're going to need something to bridge because they're in cardiogenic shock. Even when you open a huge, LED, you're not done. These are very complicated cases. But you are right that even in Carl's numbers, almost 45% of these people that had any type of cardiac arrest who were successfully resuscitated, 45% have a sentinel lesion. So, and it's easy to say this is the right thing to do when they're 40 years old. When they get old, in their 50s.
You better look around the table a little bit more.
The other thing to keep in mind is that
I'm
these
still
folks,
free on this one. So.
Early 30s.
a lot of the folks that wound up going to cath, the ones that were not found to be having a STEMI and went and had a lesion that got repaired.
Yes.
The neurological outcome was basically the same as those that did have a shockable rhythm initially and did have a STEMI. And so that means that there are people who survive who go home neurologically intact. And we didn't. If that's not why we came to work this morning, then why are we here?
You are right. There was a concern that we'd resuscitate all these people, we'd putting out CPC 3s and 4s, and that's not true at all. The actual numbers of 3s and 4s went down in overall percentage to the 1s and 2s that went back to work. So there's definitely evidence to show that these folks survived and are largely intact. We're not just resurrecting a bunch of deadheads. So.
But it does, the finances are starting to drive medical decisions, what you're saying. Not that that's unusual, but a direct financial and indirect financial in the rating of my hospital of, yeah, maybe I could save this guy, but he's such high risk, I don't want to risk it in my numbers, is really what you're talking about.
Right, and so I think if there's some way we can make a comment, maybe a suggestion like Dr. Jarvis puts up, that we dissociate this particular subset of patients. Maybe something along those lines would be appropriate for this body.
The missing piece, too, from the literature is the fact that there's not a time to cath. So what you'll see in people that are pushing this is that they will, wait 12, 24 hours to take these people to the cath lab, and that's also somewhat of a selection bias to live along.
Sure, see if they live.
Sure. There was one study in the American Journal of Cardiology came out in February of 12 that looked at those patients who were cathed within less than 6 hours and those beyond 6 hours. And those who got cathed less than 6 hours had a 72% survival, and those who were cathed greater than 6 hours only had a 44% survival, and that was statistically significant.
And that N was what? That was a pretty small
So,
isn't it?
the N was in that. It was 240 patients, and there was 6 centers in the. It was 240 patients. I don't remember. That was just Seattle. That was multi-center. Has heard the bell rings, that man. My time's up.
No.
Okay.
No, we thought Dudley was speaking first. So.
I do think it'd be beneficial to get with the cardiac committee and others to make a statement, even bringing awareness, because I'll tell you a lot of well-established interventionists that have been out a while are not in agreement, and they will argue and they will put all kinds of reasons why that's selection bias, not true data, yada, yada, yada.
Well, the sad thing is I have some questions about that also. Yeah, there's a lesion there, but I mean, there's a pretty good number of us in the room right now, completely asymptomatic, that have a lesion. Does that actually cause it? But the only way to answer that is to do this. And if we have this inverse incentive, we're never going to do it. We're never going to find out if it's valuable or not.
Yeah, but this is still larger than just cardiac. I mean, that's why I'm sitting and trying to scratch my head and figure out how we can come up with something more general to address the overall issue. And I can't come up with anything right off the top of my head. But what you're talking about, where a hospital went from being number 1 in the city to number 5 in the city, that in some ways may even be driven by EMS, because they go, hey, they're the best, let's take them there. They're the sickest, so we'll take them there. And then all of a sudden, that drops their rating. So there's so many factors, I'm not sure. I'm stuck. I'm looking for suggestions. I think it's something that if at very least, we need to let people know what effects these measurements are having on care to individual patients. We think transparency in grading facilities improves care, but this is a good example of where it probably hurts care. And it's not new. I mean, the centers that have always taken sicker patients have made these arguments for a long time.
Well, there is no ISS for this category. I mean, so maybe we need to develop some sort of a scoring system that balances it for hospitals. If you get a patient that's 17 on a score of 1 to 20, then yeah, 90% chance they're going to die. But if you get a survival rate of 70%, then you've actually beat the odds.
Yeah,
and you ought to get a plus for that, not a negative.
Right, and that kind of goes to a little bit of what I was talking about in the very beginning, is that the patient who's got neurologic function, respond to shock rhythm, he's got a STEMI, he's hemodynamically stable, he would have a low ISS score, right? What I think is in the research that's coming out now is that patients who are further along that score are doing well than most people probably would have had a gut sense that they were going to. So we're getting a little bit surprised at the survival potential with your higher, your ISS type scores you're talking about. And so that needs to be vetted to find out what those relationships are.
And just in case, hypothetically, anybody in the room is not seeing the relevance of this to what EMS does, it has a direct relevance on what we do with these patients. I had a call yesterday, 80-year-old gentleman, persistent VFib arrest. What do I do with him? Well, because of this, I said, I'm not going to call that. He needs to go. Whereas if we found that there is nothing, cath doesn't work on these patients, let's say hypothetically speaking, then I'm not going to incur the risk to my providers to transport him when I know it didn't make a difference. So what they're doing makes a huge difference on what we're doing in the field.
And of course, that assumes that you have a facility that will take him to the cath lab.
Mm-hmm. Right, because if we don't, well, we're right back where we were before.
Exactly. So anyways, I offer this for discussion.
Yeah, well, and you probably thought about it more than everybody else. Do you have recommendations for?
So, and I think I'm in the same spot we are. It's like, okay, so what do we, GETAC, what do we do with this? And I think the one thing we do is just make a statement that, and I would endorse what Dr. Jarvis has put forward, that these patients be excluded from your morbidity mortality calculations. Now, exactly who that goes to, or how I don't understand that part of the industry well enough to know exactly who we address that letter to. But that's probably what we can do externally. And then internally, is just make sure that everyone in Texas understands and goes home and talks with your providers and says, what do we in this community, how are we going to handle this?
And I would suggest once we at the GETAC level figure out what it is that we actually want to do, that we push that up to our professional societies, TSAP, ASAP, and have the cardiologists do the same thing, so that we can push that in a unified fashion. The CMS, we're the ones.
Yeah, I'm just
Thank you.
trying to come up with an action item out of this, because I think we need to take action. I'm just not sure how and who. And I guess we could talk about it at council tomorrow. Are you presenting at council tomorrow? I can't remember if you're on the agenda. Because the 3 committee reports that'll come forward, then we can discuss it at council, hopefully. And I have to look at the council agenda and see if it's an item. Any other discussion? I mean, I hate it when we have a big discussion and we don't come up with a
Well, I think
conclusion or action.
I think you could easily, based upon the evidence that exists, have some type of position or something, maybe with multiple committees that I can take back to my community and start those conversations. You know, because if we've got 5 interventional hospitals, then one says, yeah, we'll do it. Well, that's an easy decision. They all go there. Then they'll instantly all take it because they don't want out. You have to have a champion. I mean, Kern told me in his community when he started this, he had 2 cardiologists that refused. He said, fine, you're off the call schedule. It's that easy. And then they pitched a fit. Well, they're still off the call schedule. So you just have to have a champion in the community that can get others involved and choose to agree that if this is your family, this is what you want done.
And we could still consider some sort of rating system that would more fairly categorize those patients. Right now, there is none, and I know of. And trauma has a clear ISS scoring system level.
Mike, use the mic.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, trauma has a good scoring system, the ISS scoring system, and we're really talking about different levels of illness. So why not develop a cardiac scoring system that would at least give a better level playing field?
Okay.
It's a nice research paper for somebody.
Yeah. Any comments from the audience on this? Any suggestions, thoughts? If not, I think this is something we're gonna have to chew on and continue down the road. I think it's a big issue. I think it's a big problem, way beyond cardiac.
It does. It has implications this would have implications in a lot of situations where we know the risks are very high, the chances are in the single digits, maybe low 2-digit numbers, and are we going to continue to put medical therapy into something that we really don't think will benefit us and will then not only fail to benefit, but will hurt us because of the numbers.
Right.
So it's complex.
Okay, that's a happy note. All right, thank you for everybody who.
Sorry.
No. I appreciate everybody's conversation on this. Sam Vance, is he here? I have you on the agenda for EMS for Children statewide assessment update.
Yes. Excuse me. So I did receive the state data back a couple of weeks ago. However, I have not received the national data, and they are not sure when they're going to have that information to provide to the states. So unfortunately, I do not have a report for you on that.
Okay.
I do have a couple other things if we have time at the end for public comments.
Okay. Just make sure when I call for public comment, wave at me real quick.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going to jump around once again. Dr. Beeson, can you give us a report from the Trauma System Committee Registry Work Group, and then behind that will be a review of summary reports generated from the Registry Work Group from Christy Metzger.
Cliff Notes, Dr. Metzger. So there's been staff change. I'm sure she'll go over all this. Staff change, new folks leading. There's data coming in. There's data coming out. Things are moving forward. The microphone's off. She knows everything.
Okay. You've been introduced.
Hi. I don't know everything, but thank you for being confident in me. I'm Christy.
She knows more than I know.
I'm Christy Metzger, and I'm an epidemiologist, and I'm the acting manager for the Injury Epidemiology and Surveillance Branch, which houses the EMS Trauma Registry. And so we are in a time of transition. Obviously, Tammy Sajak was the previous manager, and she has been promoted to a different group in DSHS. So we are trying to find a permanent replacement for her, but I'm acting in the meantime. Staffing changes. Just wanted to mention that we have a really great team right now. We have 3 customer service staff. Ken is the team lead, and then Rose and Coyote. And so they have really been trying to address all the customer service issues in a really timely manner. We have a new system in place. We're still working on bugs, but we're thinking that this is really working a whole lot better. If anyone has trouble with any part of the registry getting data in or accessing the system, I encourage people to email our program email, which is injury.web@dshs.gov. dshs.state.tx.us. And their goal is to assist people within 3 to 5 days. And then from the data side, we have a great team of epidemiologists. Chris is our team lead, and then there's Liz and Aaron. And so if anyone needs data, we have a bunch of data, new state and RAC summary reports on our website. And that's the DSHS homepage /injury. And you can find those in a couple different places. I have slides, but I've shown the slides several times, so I think everyone probably has seen them by now. But that I'm not going over the reports themselves. I just want to tell you how to access them. It's on our website. There's on the left-hand side, there's a link called Data and Statistics. So just click on that. We really encourage everyone to look at the data that we have put up there and give us feedback. We really want to know what you want to know from our data, what you want to use it for, and how you want it displayed. And so we encourage you to look at those reports and give us feedback. Send feedback either to me, Christy.Metzger at dshs.state.tx.us, or that injury.web email address. And that's also on our page, our DSHS homepage. So that's really all I had to tell y'all. And if there's data that you want that's not in the summary reports, let us know. One of the epidemiologists will talk to you about what data we have and whether or not that will answer the question that you want to know the answer to. And our goal with data requests and epi requests is once we get clarification of what you're interested in, we hope to get y'all a summary in 10 business days. So that's our time frame right now for things. And anyways, we appreciate any feedback y'all can give us on what data y'all want.
Okay.
Is there a number to call for customer service?
There is a 1-800 number. It goes to voicemail. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's on our website. Okay. So again, so it's www.dshs.state.tx.us/injury. And that's our page. So.
Christy, is there an ongoing evolution in how you're gathering data, or is there a timeline by which you'd like feedback from us? And how?
So over the summer, we are going to move from the current data elements that we are collecting to NEMSIS and NTDB data, national data standards. The way the this new registry has been built is that should be pretty seamless, because the way the legacy data has been collected, it's being mapped to the new data elements. And so there's going to be a stakeholder webinar on next Thursday, and that information again will be on our website to go over some of the new NTDB data elements that are customized to Texas. So we're hoping that with this evolution we will become nationally compliant with those data standards, and with that process, we're having new ways to collect the data, which hopefully will be more seamless to get the data into the system as well.
And go ahead.
Go ahead.
So it was asking me recently who actually submits data. So who does submit?
Oh. Well, we are building some reports so that we can provide information to each RAC about who is submitting data and who is not submitting data. We know right now approximately 50% of entities that could report are reporting. And there's various reasons why people aren't reporting, and we're trying to make sure we can work through those as well.
And that is pre-hospital and hospital?
EMS and hospitals are both around 50%.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And one of the things that has been asked of us that we're going to work on is breaking that out by different types of reporters, like the different trauma levels in the hospitals and the different kind of EMS entities. And actually, Chris is going to report some of that today at the EMS committee.
Just to, if you would just pretend I don't know much about that data set, And can you tell me if there are any data elements that the hospitals are reporting that originate from EMS, but that the hospitals are still responsible for reporting?
There are some pre-hospital questions in the hospital data set.
And they're expected to get that from the hospital or the pre-hospital record, is that right?
Yes, from the EMS run sheets that come in, that can be used to populate that data.
Perfect, thank you.
So data like time the call was received, time it was dispatched, and all that would only come from EMS, unless that would be the only way it would work, right?
Right. I don't know off the top of my head exactly which of the pre-hospital data elements in the hospital data, but I think it does include some of those things that only can come from the EMS agency that brings the patient to the hospital.
Other questions? How many people are using the registry to pull information? I saw one hand, another hand.
The people who work with it?
Yeah.
How many people that don't work for DSHS are using it?
Relatively new that you can get that.
Yeah, well, no, I know it's new, but we have waited for this for a long, long time.
Yeah.
We've fought about it for a long time. Now that we have it, we got to start using it.
Yeah.
We got to get everybody putting data in.
Putting data in.
Data's so
Yeah.
Right.
complete.
Right.
And y'all are the experts on what's in the data, so any feedback that we can get to improve what we give back to you would be great.
Thanks, Dr. Meister.
All right. Again, next item agenda, a quick one. Item number 4. At the last council meeting, we selected a standardized committee meeting schedule. So this meeting will be standing as a 1 o'clock meeting on Thursday, or I should say the second day of committee meetings, because it's different in November. So this committee will always meet unless we can trade with somebody else. We'll always meet at this time on the second day, 1 o'clock on the second day. Believe it or not, we were able to get that schedule done fairly quickly and somewhat painlessly, and hopefully that will help everybody out as we plan. So if you look at the next, for our August meeting, whatever the Thursday is, from 1 to 2:30 will be our next meeting. If people look ahead right now and you see there's a problem, then I can start begging and negotiating and change the meeting time. Small wins sometimes, small wins. Let me see what else so Dr. Bradley is not here, but we started a discussion at the last meeting once again about state EMS medical director or medical advisor. I failed to get in touch with Dr. Bradley, did not know he would not be here today, but we couldn't really discuss it much because it wasn't on our agenda last time. I would like to open it up right now for just an open discussion about what we think about a state EMS medical director or advisor. This was most recent time, at last meeting. The reason it came up is because the ASEP report card, one of the things that that we got graded down on, which was pretty low grade to begin with, was that we did not have a designated state EMS medical director. So I'd like to open that up for anybody who would like to comment one way or another.
Well, the current way our system is designed, that individual would be nothing. No. Don't be funny. I mean, they would do nothing. I think the question is and it's usually the stakeholders that aren't at these meetings, would there be benefit in Texas? I mean, as you go around the state, would there be benefit to a liaison, representative, advisor, whatever it is? I mean, we could not have a state medical director because our system, unless you change legislature, and I still don't know that and medical board, I mean, God, anyway, that's impossible. Would there be a benefit to having somebody?
Yes, Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I can speak quite clearly at the national level, yes. That, I attend a lot of national meetings, and to have that dialogue between the doctor and the state EMS director and the federal partners just makes a whole lot of sense. And it actually gives you a lot of vision on where the system is going nationally, not just in Texas. Texas is unique, as you know, with having a delegated practice, but the input from a person in whatever role that would be as an advisor or whatever to the office or to the system or to any of the committees that are here, it seems to make sense to me. It really does.
So when you're at these national meetings, and you're sitting there at the table, are you the only guy with an empty chair next to you for a where there should be a doctor?
So I can tell you that I've only been in this role 11 months, and I've been to a couple of national meetings, but I've been, as you know, a state director for the last 11 years, and Dr. Coop is sitting there at the meeting with me. So you had that input in that relationship, and Doug and I had a great rapport from the standpoint just, he was the doctor, and I was the state EMS director, and it was a great rapport back and forth. And there's a fine line as you go through that. From the political side, the director's usually a little bit better at it than the doctor is, because Doug wanted to get things done right now, and we would have that discussion saying, okay, slow down, we'll get it done, but let's take our time doing it so we can get it done the right way and not lose you lose the program here. So there's always that advantage to it. From a Texas standpoint, I'm still learning Texas. I got to tell you, you got a big state here. There's no doubt.
So I think one of the things that always makes me scratch my head is my gut reaction when I hear this is that this is Texas. We don't need a state medical director telling us what to do. And I think perhaps that is because I don't really understand the concept. Can you think of a state that has a well-functioning state medical director and perhaps describe what they do? I think we think about it in terms of a state medical advisor who represents Texas nationally and with other states, and that is completely different than someone who is directing the practice on the streets.
Sure.
And I think maybe if we define those terms, that might help quite a bit.
And that is where the issue is, or the problem will be with Texas. So coming here from Pennsylvania worked under, the EMS system worked under the state medical director. And he set the tone for the protocols that everybody used, the same protocols. He set the kind of tone of where we're going, advancing the care that's happening in the rigs. On the other side, he also advised the office, as we were going down the road for community EMS and all those other medical issues. He was a strong advice to the office on that. That's going to be harder here since it's delegated practice here, and they wouldn't have that role. I mean, you could call that person up and have a discussion, say, hey, what about this? Those kind of things, but it's going to be a little bit different because of the structure of Texas.
I think you would. I certainly would not have a problem with a state medical director whose job was, or a state medical advisor, if you will. I would have a problem with someone trying to enforce protocols on my systems. And I think the reason is that I don't have a problem with trying to create a floor. But through my involvement with state government, what I finally or quickly found is that enforcing a state floor turns out to be enforcing a state ceiling very, very rapidly. And I think that there is a huge benefit to different systems in Texas being able to do different things. We find out very quickly what works and what doesn't. So if one system decides to do something completely unheard of, like taking all cardiac arrest patients to the cath lab, they don't get that approved from a state protocol. Right. They do it because they think there's evidence there. And it turns out, wow, maybe there's some benefit to that. So I think when I would oppose a state medical director that imposes state protocols, and I somehow don't think I would be the only one.
And I would have to agree with you. I mean, coming from a state where we went to state protocols, it turns out to be the floor because you've got to set a protocol that works for everybody. And the more advanced services complained about that because they were already doing moving things farther along. And then in some of the more rural areas where they were struggling to come up to even the floor level. So, you know, I can't disagree with you on that. I mean, there has to be that flexibility. From an advisor standpoint, I think we'd all would agree to that. When we're doing reviews of cases, having the doctor sitting in on the review is really beneficial, you know, through if it's a discipline or just a QA process. It's really helpful to have that voice there and that knowledge there. I don't, you know, I believe, if I understand the law, we would have to change the whole law to have what I would call a state medical director. And in Texas, that would, in some areas, push you backwards, and in other areas, it would probably pull you up. But all in all, I think it would do more damage than good.
What about having a state medical advisor that worked with DSHS?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It really does. And I always thought, and I don't really, you know, I'm still learning. This body here, the chair seems to be the appropriate person. And
No.
Yeah. I make the motion.
I second.
It is the
Jeff,
EMS
throw me
medical
dinner now,
director
Jeff.
representative to the council.
Jeff owes me dinner on that one now. He told me to say that.
Yeah, it's okay. Purse is nodding his head back behind you the whole time too. So.
But there's some logic in that.
Right. So then the next question would be, since that's going to take time, is there any money for that? Because I don't see anybody at the table that would just volunteer their time for that, because that's going to quickly become a large job.
And I am really so happy that Jane just walked in and sat down. And probably a short answer.
But,
2 letters.
yeah, that's.
No, not at this time. There is not funding for
Right.
such a position.
Right.
I'm just curious, some of the other states that have that role, is that more or less a physician, like if we had a full role, that they move to Austin, give up practice, and that's all what they do for 12 months or whatever term? Is that what other states do? Or is it usually in addition to?
And I don't know the exact answer, but my gut tells me it's part-time. I can tell you in Pennsylvania, Dr. Coop has had 20 hours a week, but it was never like 9 to 5. It was whatever. And some weeks it might have worked 60 hours, and some weeks might have been, 10 hours, depending. But he was always available to the office, and we used him a lot in disaster response too. So when we were looking for directions for in the H1N1, should they wear masks or not, where we couldn't get a strong answer from the federal government, we just made a decision. He made a decision. When there was a drug shortage, he did some stuff like that too.
So again, going back from a national perspective, at being represented at the table, because that's what I keep hearing is Texas has representation at the table. Just to give us an idea of how it looks, are there 49 other doctors in the room representing the other 49 states in one empty chair, or is it 50-50?
I would think somewhere around 70%. That would be my guess.
Have medical directors or do not have medical directors?
Do have medical directors. And you see on a regular basis.
Represented at the table.
Yes, someone sitting in that role.
So it would seem to me, though, that it is within the purview of this committee and the council to make a recommendation to DSHS to consider establishing a medical advisor role with potential funding.
It has to be more than potential. I mean, if you're going to take the time and travel and
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's
If you want it done.
In other states, I believe the state medical director is involved in statewide, quality improvement efforts, performance improvement efforts, setting baseline education standards for pre-hospital providers, and so on and so forth. So there could be a lot more to that role.
Right.
Yeah, critical.
They really do set the tone for where the system should be going. The high performance CPR was, something that Doug was really supportive of and is now mandated statewide. And the scenes are the safety in the back of an ambulance on the truck, seat belts. That he's really passionate about that, and it kind of sets the tone.
Okay. So my sense from the committee is that we are in favor of a state medical advisor.
And representative.
Okay.
liaison, ambassador.
Who would represent? And my sense is everyone is opposed to a state medical director.
Just couldn't have it.
Just
The
wouldn't
way
work.
our rules are, I mean, you could give them a title, but they'd be able to have it.
Okay. So I will open it up actually to the audience that this committee is considering making a recommendation to the state to establish a state EMS medical advisor. Is there any public comment on that? Yes, sir. I'm glad. I was going to call you if you didn't get up there anyway.
I was kind of thinking perhaps we should name the medical director for the state's largest city.
The largest. Let me think about what that could be. Who that
Okay,
could
moving
be.
right along to the next point. So I'm going to, so for my role with the National Registry, I'm going to switch hats here for a moment. And speaking to the national landscape, there are clearly advantages for the states that have state EMS medical directors that are at the table. One of the things, though, is that there are state EMS medical directors, and then there's state EMS medical directors who really understand EMS. Sometimes there are state EMS medical directors who are career bureaucrats who really don't understand what it's like to be in the trenches. And I completely endorse Jeff's point that I would go down this road, but I would not touch the Medical Practice Act of Texas. If we want to have an advisor, that's fine. I would recommend that, as we start thinking about the qualifications of that person, it needs to be somebody who has done EMS, really done EMS, and not somebody who just wants to get out of clinical practice, they've been in the ER a bunch of years, they're looking for an easier job, something like that. That would be bad for us, because then you're going to have somebody on the national stage who's going to look like, who's that idiot from Texas, and what's he talking about, right? We don't want to go there. So I think that it would be advantageous to us at the national stage. I think that it would have to come with some funding, especially, if we live in a world where you get what you pay for. So if we want somebody who's qualified, somebody who's really engaged, we're going to have to show them the respect and give them somewhat of a decent salary. And so anyways, that was my comment. That would be my comments.
My concern is things are moving now with national standard guidelines and other things that Texas doesn't have much of a representative in that. And I don't know that it would affect our ability to do what we do in Texas, our independent practice, delegated practice, but I will tell you, when there's a national clinical set, it's going to be hard to argue when you're not, if that's the floor or whatever, it's going to be hard to argue when you're different than the national. My fear is if the position gets created, how does that person get hired? Who hires that person? Who oversees that person? And then it truly would be years until a position like that, and their funding, even if there was ever funding in years, and it's a long, long pathway.
But if the object is to have an EMS medical director in a position to serve as liaison from the national stage to DSHS, and then to Texas EMS, I mean, this table or the GETAC table makes the most sense. And if you draw your candidate from that population, I think you remove a lot of the randomness or a lot of the risk that you're going to end up with, again, simply a career bureaucrat that isn't truly involved on a regular basis with Texas EMS.
Could it function with a panel? In other words, could you grab one of us and say, hey, there's a meeting up in Washington, D.C. I need a EMS medical advisor from Texas. We can pay your expenses. Thanks, Jane. I mean, if we actually got to that point, where there was funding, we can pay your expenses. And I think actually most of us would be satisfied with just having our expenses paid. I don't want to speak for everybody, but could it even be one of us instead of one of us?
Or let's make a board or panel instead of.
Well, I think you name somebody, but you can always send an alternate if for some reason that person couldn't go. And Dr. Greenberg, not trying to put you in a spot, it seems to Joe Schmier, without having a discussion with Jane, that the chairman of this committee sees to be the appropriate person for this.
Yeah.
And from the standpoint,
don't you smile like
That's
that?
a steak dinner,
but they represent
Right.
GETAC and the group, and there is a lot of wisdom to the same person going, because I think
Okay.
the knowledge the wealth of knowledge is not in the meeting. It's in the meetings before the meeting, in the hallways, and the meeting after the meetings. And just seeing that dialogue and learning what's happening at the other levels is really important.
I think if you want to do it, it's going to take time and years. Texas doesn't move very quickly at a state level. So you say, okay, we want to have one person being the state advisor, and we know that's going to take a while to do. In the meantime, perhaps he is the chair of this committee, is that representative, and frequently we just understand he's going to have to send representatives. As a stopgap
I think that's
measure.
what most states do right now. They have a lead person, and they can't, somebody else fills in for them.
Sorry, we were having a little bit of a side discussion because Beeson asked why I keep throwing him under the bus, and I keep asking why he's throwing me under the bus. But what we had, we kind of came to a conclusion years back that the EMS medical director representative to the council, which is now Dr. Jeffrey Beeson, would be the designated state EMS medical advisor. We didn't use all of those terms, and I don't know that we ever did anything with it. At that time, it was Dr. Phillips.
Well, I thought we passed a motion that said that we would appoint that person with that title. So it would seem to me.
Yeah. So we had previously not, it wasn't the chairman of this committee. Somehow Dr. Ellerby got out of that. I don't know how.
Smarter than the current chairman, I guess.
Yes.
Didn't get these white hair for
Gotcha.
nothing, man.
But that was who we had previously said would represent. We're probably discussing or arguing over something that's not quite as important as the fact that we feel like there should be someone from the state who is designated, whose last name starts in B.
A person and an alternate dress identically the same.
Oh, man, that bus just got both of us. I think it's the guy that should be on the committee the longest.
They planned it, I think.
Covers the largest territory of the state by miles.
No.
So.
And it will get you, if something like this gets set up, even if there's no money exchanged,
Right.
even if we can't pay for travel, if nothing else, by having a representative, we can at least get the name on the mailing list, the emails, get invited to the conference calls, or whatever's going on nationally for these doctors.
Okay. So it is on our agenda that we can consider the advantages, disadvantages of a medical advisor. It doesn't say, and possibility of designating a state. So we actually can take action on this the way I read our agenda.
I would like to make a motion.
As long as it's about
we
Dr.
haven't already-
Beeson, feel free.
Am I doing the Robert's Rules right?
Yes.
I move that we acknowledge our previous statement, that our previous motion we passed, that the person who represents who is the medical director sitting on the GETAC council would continue to be that state advisor. And if at any time that individual, whoever that might be, needed one of us to stand in for a meeting for him or whatever that was, that anyone on this committee is completely qualified to do that.
Second.
Third.
All right. Is there discussion about that? You don't get the microphone.
He has an ethical conflict
He has an ethical conflict?
with having the microphone now.
Yes, he does.
Have a caveat.
Yes.
Should it be discovered that we could pay for reimbursement for travel, okay, we have that ability, as you know, to pay for council members only at this time.
Oh.
That might be part of your consideration.
That would fit with the motion.
That does fit with the motion. That fits with, oh, yeah.
I
that fits
second
with-
that motion.
Because that right, so functionally right now, that means that would be Dr. Beeson or myself. Now,
A
usually.
blue shirt.
Somebody.
What, nobody else wear a blue shirt?
Is your shirt blue?
Everybody else got the memo about what
Yeah.
not to wear today.
All right, yeah. And not to sit together and look like, gotcha. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor with a caveat, and the way I understand it is we are going to reaffirm our previous recommendation that the EMS medical director, member of the council, is listed as the state medical advisor anytime you need to list someone as such, and that the person that will back them up is any other member of this committee? Or
Well, I guess I would like to make an amendment to my motion, if it's true, because really, travel's going to have to be covered for this.
Right.
It just has to be covered. So that would leave you, Dr. Greenberg, as the assistant. So I would like to amend my motion with that. Do you want me to restate the whole thing?
no, you don't have to restate
Thank
it.
you.
I think we're good.
I think perhaps.
So to bring it all the way to very specific, Dr. Beeson will be the.
Don't use names, please.
Sorry, I was being really specific. Dr. Beeson would be the medical advisor, and I would be the next guy, whatever that term would be. Is that what we recommend?
Might just technically title that person the state EMS medical advisor.
State EMS medical advisor. And I will take that recommendation to the council, and the council will then make that recommendation to DSHS. Maybe. Well, no, it'll go to DSHS. Then they do with it what they want.
We may have opposition on the council.
There may be opposition on the council.
By the two people who wish.
Futile opposition.
Is there discussion about that? How do people feel about that? We will be representing the state. People good with that? So we'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Are you truly opposed, sir?
No.
Okay.
I'm embarrassed for Texas.
All right, so I will take that to the council on tomorrow as our recommendation. But it is what we said before.
It is.
But this time I think we are going to push it to where we would like to be involved.
Well, it is, not only is it what we said before, but
closer.
honestly, we have trouble in Texas because of the way we are, the Lone Star State. And I agree with you, Dr. Jarvis. I have no problems having minimums. I don't want them to become maximums. But the truth is, we still need some minimum guidance here around our state. And as the Medical Directors Committee, we all know that. And everyone sitting in this room knows that. So we're really preaching to the choir when we talk about any of this. But I think this is a step forward, and I think it gives more potential validity to the statements that are made from the state EMS medical director. So that I appreciate you guys agreeing.
Okay. Wow, that was easier than the last time we did that, or the other times we've done that. So, Dr. Macias, is he here? I have not looked. I always have trouble looking out there. He's listed under pediatric transfer and transport guidelines. I don't know if Sam's involved in that or not, or if he's still here.
Yeah, I can speak to
Can you
that.
speak to that? Oh, excellent.
So Sally Snow was.
Microphone.
Excuse me.
The microphone, you have to have the microphone so it's picked up for the internet.
Sally Snow on the pediatric committee was appointed to sort of chair this process of developing pediatric transfer and interfacility transfer guidelines. She had asked me to assist with this, and we reviewed a number of guidelines and basically created a set of guidelines based off what the state of Washington is doing. This has not yet been approved or reviewed by the pediatric committee. Once it is, I assume it will then come back towards the medical directors for approval.
Do the Washington standards have requirements or recommendations or something for doing pediatric interfacility transports that may affect a large percentage of our providers in the state?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that question. It's definitely guidelines. It's not it's not legislative. It's not a requirement. They're simply guidelines. Yes.
Well, guideline has a different terminology than recommendation. So I can see a concern, especially folks coming, that we say if you're going to do pediatric interfacilities, you have to have all the specialty pediatric equipment, pediatric training, which is going to affect not us in the urban areas where we have pediatric specialty teams that do most of those, but in the rural areas where you have small volunteer, and they're the only hospital transporting a sick kid to somewhere else, that's going to have huge implications. So I would, you can take it back to Sally, whoever, but guidelines has a different.
So within the guidelines, there is a section on recommendations for how a child be transported, whether that be by BLS or ALS or a pediatric specialty transport team. And it's very general, but I will take that back to Sally.
Well, that moves us right into actually agenda item number 8. Again, at the last meeting, we started a discussion that was not on our agenda, and therefore I put it on this month's agenda. It is consider recommendations or a position statement on the various situations during which ground EMS or air medical providers may be overused or inappropriately mandated for interfacility transfers. And that's right kind of at the, there's a lot of pediatric teams out there. It's rumored there are facilities that refuse to accept patients unless you use our pediatric, or I shouldn't say pediatrics, not just pediatric, our transport service or a transport service of, certain caliber, and it has to be green and white or something of that sort. Again, we started the discussion and I had to stop it because it was not on the agenda. So I'm opening it up for discussion now as to how big a problem it is if we need to take a stand on it. And I'll kind of go from there.
So obviously you're the chair and have the discretion of expanding this out, but it's not just the receiving centers. I think my mic is broken. There's a common misconception that if you're going to transfer a patient from one facility to another, it must go by ambulance.
Correct.
That EMTALA says that.
It does not.
That's not true, but I think that if we're going to talk about that, frequently I think ground and air ambulances are inappropriately used for patients who are perfectly stable to go with a loved one. So perhaps we could clarify that I think people who...
That falls under this because that would be, to me, inappropriate use of ground EMS. Yeah. If you have a fractured arm and your pain's controlled, you can certainly go with mom and dad.
And I would lump many psych patients in that.
If not all.
They don't require ambulance at all.
Right.
And if you are going to go by ambulance, it certainly does not necessarily dictate that that is an emergency transfer.
Oh, yes. That is a whole different interesting issue when someone is transferred between facilities. If it's determined to be emergency or non-emergency, very much affects the process and the reimbursement. And there's errors on both sides of that. So how do we start chewing it? First of all, is this something worthy of our time and effort? And how do we start chewing at it? Do you have any special perspective from I wasn't really picking on pediatrics, but it comes up, I think, more with pediatrics than anything.
Yeah, I think the challenges in pediatrics are the limited amount of experience that pre-hospital providers have with pediatrics, which I think is why a pediatric-specific set of interfacility guidelines or recommendations may be better suited for that population. But if you're dealing with, the adult population, the specifics may be slightly different from what you would choose for the pediatric population.
Do you know, I haven't read that document, but does it, I had to transfer a child the other day for asthma that I just couldn't break, but overall wasn't doing that badly. My facility doesn't take them. They did not need a pediatric subspecialty neurosurgeon enhanced ambulance. They didn't need an ALS ambulance. They didn't need a BLS ambulance. My 16-year-old daughter could have taken care of them going from one place to another. And as a matter of fact, the patient's mother did a great job with it. Does that specify that transfers don't necessarily need any ambulance? Or is it really geared towards ambulances?
It's geared towards ambulances, with BLS being the lowest level for patients who are otherwise stable. Certainly we could consider putting an option in there where, BLS or private vehicle, but that currently is not in the document.
I would say the biggest problem is misunderstanding of the laws. From both the transporting or transferring physician as much as the transferring facility. If anything, I think there would be benefit to some informational document that includes involvement from a lot of the other committees that exist in GETAC and possibly coming from GETAC, that an awareness and it would obviously be some legal interpretation, which I'm sure the state may or may not have or offer, but to include all of these things as a subspecialty population, mental health, just to the fact of what EMTALA says, as I'm an EMS agency in a market where I'm being misused, that I can take that document and have conversations with the hospitals about what's appropriate, not appropriate, because you're right. Hospitals are calling for emergency transfers because if it's deemed an emergency, then there's no requirement for PAN numbers or other thing for pre-authorizations. But as the operation, you go and pick that up, and that's not an emergency, you bill it as emergency, then you're fraudulent. So it puts the operator, and especially like where I am currently in a closed market, at a very difficult thing because you have to service your customers. And it may also open competitive areas up into some incentive to fraudulently do things simply to meet customers' desires.
Well, you're basically stuck between committing fraud and eating a bill.
That's right. But it's far more than just the medical director.
You know, I will add that it is an industry problem also from the standpoint that I hold the grounds and I say to the facility, look, this is fraud. I can't take this patient, but I go to an ambulance down the service, we'll transport it, and all of a sudden I'm cut out of any transports there. And that becomes a real problem for the industry in general.
Right.
And I think you could write a position paper on this. I'm not sure what you would say, other than you really have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis and get to the CEO of the hospitals. And you know, you have to get out of the ED and up into the management of the hospital so that there's some dialogue going back and forth on what's going on here. I know some hospitals nationally, in the case that you were just talking about with the asthma, actually discharged the patient and said, you know, you really should go to another hospital because that was the only way they could get them out of their hospital without their legal department going crazy. We're going to discharge you, but you should go see this doctor, and they're waiting for you, and go
Discharged from the ICU with a, perhaps you might be admitted to this other ICU.
Yeah.
Feel free not to yank that tube out of your mouth. On the
Right. Yeah. It's a crazy.
You gotta squeeze this. Hold on.
Yeah. Don't stop.
I think it's very difficult to identify exactly what criteria are necessary for different transport based on the resources that are available within given communities. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging. You know, providers and volunteer EMS systems may not have the same experience that other areas do, and certainly emergency department to emergency department, there's a significant amount of variability in terms of education and knowledge base, and there'll be patients that are asthma patients, like you suggested, where providers haven't seen a pediatric asthma patient in years, and this is really frightening to them. And they don't necessarily even know that that's the official diagnosis. Could there be something else going on with this patient? Because they look way sicker than they would imagine, and they would say that child is unstable, whereas you might say that child is stable. And so that's where the challenge, I think, lies.
I don't think we get into the clinical things because obviously Texas, with its minimal regulations, I mean, in some states they truly have a lot of regulations that mandate interfacility work, especially critical care interfacility work, because it's not covered in EMS education. I mean, it's on the job learning most of the time. I would also argue that some rural volunteer areas are probably better at this long critical care than a lot of your urban 5-minute transport times are. I think what my recommendation would be is that we create an informational document of just not clinical decision, what needs to go in what, but understanding what, almost like a down-to-earth interpretation of your EMTALA requirements and your fears, that if you do transport somebody interfacility, you still have to do all your EMTALA stuff, but the mode of transport is not mandated by that. I think there's a lot of misperceptions also that when a children's transport team shows up from the children's hospital, that the sending physician is now off the hook because the receiving physician is now assumed care. That's not the case. I mean, that's not what, so there's a lot of misunderstandings for everyday practicing physicians and the PAs, nurse practitioners, whatever, who are transporting these patients. And we could, GETAC, not just this committee, but multiple committees could, I think, come up with something that could be an informational document, not a position statement, but an informational document.
I think this is one of the times where regulation actually did get it right, and they said the sending physician who is there assessing the patient is knowledgeable of the local resources and is in the best position to make the decision about mechanism of transport. You're absolutely right, though, and a lot of times perhaps that sending physician has no idea what the capabilities are, so perhaps an informational thing would be absolutely the right thing. And then we
I
don't
agree
have to
with
worry
that.
about trying to be really specific about, in this clinical setting.
And you can bring up some of these cases as examples. Mental health, like I think what started this whole conversation was the mental health stuff.
Is this in the, I'm going to look at Joe, I think. Joe, you've probably read the old trauma system plan better than anybody. Is this even alluded to anywhere in there?
No.
I don't think
It's
so.
not.
I was trying to think about it, and I don't have a copy
Because
here.
I thought when I read it looking for stuff pertaining to the so it's not. It's particularly talking about EMS trauma systems. Doesn't talk. I mean, there is some stuff in there about transporting to or agreements for transportation or transfer to higher level or trauma centers or whatever. But when it talks about modes and things, it's not.
I don't know if it would be I don't know if it would be appropriate or inappropriate to put it into that document, which is a little bit of a lead into there will be a meeting today at 5:30, 5 o'clock. What time's the meeting today, Dr. Eastridge?
After the last committee meeting, so it's probably around 5 o'clock.
So yeah, at 5 o'clock today there is going to be a meeting to discuss the state trauma system plan, revisions to the state trauma system plan. Yeah, EMS and trauma system plan, correct. And I don't know if that's going to go in there or not. Anybody want to try to bite that? And I don't know if anything exists on this or not. I don't know the NAMSP or ASEP or.
There's breakdowns of specific topics pertaining to ambulances using hospital helipads, and there's some specific interpretations on portions of EMTALA, but I'm unaware that there's ever been one talking about modes of the interfacility and appropriate utilization and that kind of stuff. I know there's never been anything to educate sending physicians on emergency, non-emergency, and the implications that you put operators in, providers in when you pull that.
And I think it's a national issue.
Yeah.
It's definitely not unique to Texas, and I think everyone's wrestling with it. I'm sure we could do a research and try to find some papers out there, but I don't think I have not seen anything that says you should do this and do that. It's just so gray.
Sounds like a topic for the MSP.
Yeah, it does sound like an NAMSP topic. I know years ago I kind of set up a little bit of an algorithm for our transfer center to advise for what kind of transport to use, but it was I don't know if I can find it. It was fairly generic. I don't know if you have one of those as well in your system. A lot of big tertiary referral systems will have something like that, but it's not.
If you want to carry this over to your next meeting, I'll do some research nationally and see what I can dig out and send it to you, and then we can put it back on the table for next meeting if you want to do that.
Yeah. No,
We have an MSP board meeting next month too. I'll bring it up.
Okay. Dr. Beeson said he had an NAMSP board meeting next month. He'll bring that up. That's when he's representing Texas, by the way. So.
Come on, MSP.
And I'm sure no one there knows you're from Texas.
Hell no.
The hat's not a giveaway at all.
All right. We only have a few minutes left, like 8 minutes left.
12 minutes and 40 seconds.
No, well, we got started late, so I'm going to open it up to any public comment, public questions. I think specifically Sam Vance had something, if he's still in the room. There.
So for the sake of time, I will try and keep this relatively short. The EMS for Children Advisory Committee has developed a work group to investigate the possibility of instigating a pediatric facility recognition program. I believe you all should have received emails on the webinars that we held on April 17th and the 28th. For those who did not receive the email with the link to the recorded webinar that we did on the 28th, it is available on our website now. I would encourage you to take a look at that, and we could definitely discuss that at the August meeting. We have received formal endorsement of this program from the Texas Pediatric Society and the Texas Emergency Nurses Association, and are seeking endorsement from CHAT, whose board meeting is coming up to discuss it. We will also be, actually Dr. Remick will be discussing it to the Texas Hospital Association in August, and we have also presented it to the Texas College of Emergency Physicians. I'd be happy to answer any questions about it right now, or we could talk about it in August if you'd like.
Sam, one thing I'm concerned about in our critical access points, our hospitals that aren't going to go through this process, that really don't want any pediatrics, that by now, not registering, but whatever, that certifying pediatric facilities, that there are facilities that I think it's going to put them in a weird situation. So if they have a pediatric that doesn't particularly have a good outcome, and it's going to end up just like your, well, I would say stroke and cardiac, but I just have concerns for not the folks who want to go through the process, the ones who don't or won't go through the process, that really doesn't want kids anyway, but they're the only access point for that service area.
Right. And if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, this program would strictly be voluntary?
Of course, they all are.
No, yeah. So
Participating in Medicare is voluntary.
well,
If I could just speak to that
Sure.
just briefly, what the goal behind a pediatric facility recognition program is just meeting baseline requirements for meeting the needs of children. And if you look at what other states have done around the country, critical access hospitals are absolutely involved in these programs, where they may be identified as standby emergency departments approved for pediatrics and of that nature. So it's not necessarily being a children's hospital or a tertiary care center or even a community hospital with inpatient pediatric resources. It's simply meeting the needs of children in the emergency department setting such that you could stabilize a medical emergency. And that's really the baseline of it. And if you look around the states, other hospitals have really become a bit competitive about it in terms of wanting to achieve that recognition. But there's no doubt a much larger population of hospitals here and going to be much more regional variation.
And if you can, can I say this? I don't know. Can you send me by email how you would like to be that titled for the next meeting?
Sure.
The titling that I can put on the agenda.
Sure. So how much time is left on the timer?
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, then the next program we're working on that I was going to mention in the EMS committee that I have spoken with Dr. Greenberg about, it is a voluntary pediatric EMS recognition program that, to keep it short, would basically recognize the EMS agency for carrying pediatric equipment, having protocols, having pediatric continuing education, and doing community outreach, things such as car seat safety inspections, bicycle helmets, that type of thing. And for sake of time, I'll be going into more detail of that with the EMS committee. And then on a happy note, next week is EMS week. And so it is. Next week is EMS week, believe it or not. And the Wednesday of EMS week is always EMS for Children Day. We have received a gubernatorial proclamation of May 21st is EMS for Children Day in Texas. We will be presenting that on the south steps of the state capitol on Wednesday, May 21st at 10:30, and everyone is welcome to come. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Any other public comment? You're sort of public, but yeah.
Well, I started as public. So I'd like to address two things really quickly. First, your previous conversation, I think there may be a little bit of a misunderstanding possibly with 3 delineations of emergency. When you're moving a patient to tertiary care, some people associate emergency with some intervention that's going to need to take place in order to sustain the patient. Then you also have the billing definition. So I always want to warn people, when we start using the word fraud, we have to have a very clear understanding about how things are billed, including the state reimbursement program. So the definition of emergency from a reimbursement standpoint of interfacility may not be necessarily the functional definition from a physician standpoint. And so I don't want people to start clouding the water, because what happens is when you're moving a patient from a rural hospital or even a semi-rural or whatever you want to call a suburban hospital into a tertiary care facility, a lot of payer sources call those emergencies because that patient needs the care of a physician or a specific surgical practice that does not take place out in those communities. So when you need to really delineate the conversation between elevations in care to a specialized hospital versus within a system. You know, if a large system has a pediatric facility and they have a lot of outstanding ERs, and they're going to take them from their outstanding ER over to the services of a physician within their own community or within their own realm, that's a whole different kind of transfer than it is from arm's length agreements to take specific types of patients. So I just want to caution that, you know, when you start talking about the dynamics of it, there's always a money issue, because if there's not the availability of somebody to do the transport, then the patients ultimately suffer as well. So if they can't get to the place they need to be. So that segues me into another issue. 21st, great, thanks. The 22nd, there is going to be a meeting held. HHSC is holding a meeting as a result of some specific issues that have come up with a program that was the Medical Transport Providers Program. Normally the MTP, as it's called, is the NEEMT or EMTP, which is simply non-emergency medical transportation. And its specific realm has always been taking people to and from medical facilities in an alternative manner, whether it be wheelchair, a handicap accessible van where they can get a walker on board. In a cost savings measure, there's been some initial mission creep that's being blamed on Senate Bill 8. Nowhere in Senate Bill 8 was there ever mentioned that specifically any type of stretcher or ambulance patient should be moved over into the MTP outside of the fee-for-service of the MCOs. So all these acronyms make people's eyes roll back, but the bottom line is this from the Medical Directors Committee. Texas is a proud delegated practice state. We are able to then tailor the care throughout our state based on the needs of our community and the availability of resources from people to equipment to recurrent training. Because delegated practice fits in our large state, this type of a move is very dangerous for us. They are essentially trying to take a subset of patients, and they're saying it is a small subset of patients, and say that they need stretcher transportation, but they don't need medical care. The problem is that we have a law on the books in the state of Texas that says that anybody that's moved by stretcher must do so in a licensed DSHS ambulance. Within the law of this reimbursement piece, they have actually advocated for 2 uncertified people to be able to carry out this small subset of transfers. Don't have to have any life-saving emergency equipment, not even our AEDs and EpiPens and things that we consider fundamental, and they're in a measure for cost savings. So we need medical director community involvement to point out that there has to be a physician-level interaction to decide for appropriate levels of transportation. If they're coming out of a medical facility or they're under the direct care of a physician, whether their subspecialty is nephrology and their renal dialysis patient, those physicians know how fragile that person is, and they need to play a role in that. And so moving them outside of the clinical aspect and trying to move them as luggage on a stretcher, that's very concerning. So I challenge that you get brought up to speed. I'll be happy to talk to any of you away from the microphone. But we definitely need people to understand that We can't start mission creep outside of what we understand to be patient care, whether it's transportation or not. So I ask that you keep track of that, and it's the 22nd.
We are actually out of time. Even though it says 2 minutes, we got started late. That's my fault, we got started late. So I have one action item to take to the council, which is the reaffirmation of our representative as the Texas EMS Medical Advisor. And we will meet again in August. Thank you to everybody.